Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to tonight's MEDTalk. This is the last in a series of 6 health and wellness lectures featuring alumni and faculty of the College of Medicine and School of Rehabilitation Science. My name is Dr. Teresa Pazlowski. I'm the Associate Dean for the School of Rehab Science. I'm very pleased to be here with all of you this evening, and I'm looking forward to this talk. I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. The College of Medicine's Alumni Association wanted to ensure that there were no barriers for you to attend tonight, so they've generously sponsored this lecture and the refreshments that will follow. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to make a donation in support of this talk. The excess funds will be used to support our students' charitable initiatives. This lecture is being recorded, so if you'd like to hear it again or share it with someone, the link will be on the Eventbrite registration website. Now I'd like to introduce to you Shelly Prosko. Shelly is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan in the Masters of Physical Therapy program. She's also a yoga therapist, a speaker, a mentor, and an educator with over 20 years of experience in integrating yoga into physiotherapy and working with people who are in pain. As a respected pioneer of PhysioYoga, she works to empower individuals to create and sustain meaningful lives by teaching and advocating for the integration of yoga into modern healthcare. Shelly maintains a clinical practice in Sylvan Lake, Alberta. Please join me in welcoming Shelly Prosko.
Okay, thank you, Teresa, for that nice introduction. Welcome. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Good. It's nice to see so many faces. I think this might be testament to your interest in yoga and in chronic or persistent pain. So just welcome and thank you so much. And thanks to the U of S and the Alumni Association for inviting me. This is such an honor to be here. And obviously I'm very excited to talk about this topic. But I do want to just, there's a few disclosures that I'd like to make before I start so you know where I'm coming from and you can see my biases. So I am a sole proprietor as a physiotherapist and a yoga therapist. So that means I do receive income from different services and products that I provide. And there is one product at the end of this talk in the recommended resources that I do receive royalties from, and I'll let you know what that is, but I just wanted to be clear about that up front. And this is important, I think, it may be evident and obvious, but I think it's important to say, and that is that I am very biased towards integrating yoga into healthcare, into pain care. How I will mitigate that bias, however, is I will try my best to not make these global sweeping claims. I try really hard to critically review the evidence and what it's telling us and share with you where the gaps are and the limitations. So I will try. You hopefully won't see me really succumb to my biases throughout this talk, but just have to be honest. Okay, so the integration of yoga in healthcare. And my passion here really comes from my dedication, my commitment to really want to help people in pain and help enhance our current pain care system and the way we're helping people. We do a lot of things really, really well, and there's room for us to do even more and to do even better. So I first want to talk about chronic or persistent pain. We'll take just some time to talk about the issue, the problem, and then we'll get into yoga. And I'm sure there's many different people here who have different experiences and knowledge of background, so I'll kind of get us on the same page. And then we'll get into, of course, how yoga and yoga therapy, a little bit of a difference there, and how that might help the solution or to be part of the solution to this pain care problem that we have. So chronic or persistent pain, you'll notice I'm going to use these words interchangeably. And they mean the same thing, but in the literature we're hearing now a lot persistent pain because there's a few reasons, but when you look at the term chronic pain, for some people that can really give us this sense of like it's sort of a doomsday it just sounds like there's no hope. It's chronic. It's going to be forever. There's nothing we can do. We've tried all these procedures. We've tried everything. There's no cure for your chronic pain, so you have to live with it. Well, what we're knowing now is that we can change and influence pain, and it doesn't have to be a doomsday diagnosis. So persistent pain is a little more descriptive, like it's pain that persists. And for some people, this feels a little lighter, more expansive, and might give them a little bit more hope. Now that said, I think it's interesting to note that some people, and maybe some of you in this room who are living with or suffering from persistent or chronic pain, you may prefer the term chronic pain. It's more validating. Perhaps it's actually something that shows, look, this is a label, and it is something that just shows and kind of proves how much I really am suffering. And to say persistent pain, just doesn't really demonstrate how much I'm suffering. So we have heard that from people who are living with pain too. So just, I think it's important to know that we're using these two terms, and it's not that one's better than the other or right or wrong. That's just the way it goes, okay? So here we go with, I don't know how much you all know about chronic pain and the problem, but we do see about 1 in 5 Canadians that are living with some sort of persistent pain. That's an estimate, and this is adult Canadians. Other countries are similar, so there's some European countries, Australia, India are around the same, 1 in 5. China's around 1 in 3, and then the US is about 1 in 4. And it is one of the leading causes of years lived with disability. So there were the global burden of disease. They do these massive studies. They did two of the most recent ones in 2007, and then in 2013 or 17, I think it was 2017, showed that chronic low back pain is one of the leading causes of years lived with disability. And it's extremely costly for nations, for economic systems, and healthcare systems. So I'm curious, does anybody know, or do you want to hazard a guess as to the total annual cost of chronic pain either in Canada or the US? And I've got some stats here I'm going to share. Does anyone want to shout out anything? Do you have any idea? Yeah, well, yes, and that was my next. That was yeah. Trust me, I'm with you. Yeah. So with the amount here, I'll tell you this. So with cancer, $243 billion in the U.S. are spent per year, is the estimated cost. Diabetes, $188 billion. Heart disease, $309 billion. Chronic pain, does anyone want to guess? Now that I have some 560 billion in total annual cost. That's in the U.S. In Canada, I came across, and there's different statistics and stuff, but one I came across, Hogan et al., 2016, estimated as $7 billion of direct healthcare costs per year. And then the Canadian Institute of Health Research in 2016 estimated total annual costs, so that includes loss of productivity and all healthcare spending related to chronic pain, was anywhere between 43 and 60 billion. Now, that was just, when you do these talks, you want to set a stage to like what the problem is. But that's exactly was my next thing I wanted to say was this doesn't even come close to the cost that this has on people who live with pain, who are living with loved ones, who have pain. Not only just the financial burden, because it is financially burdensome for people in pain, procedures, medications, etc., but also the other costs, your physical, your mental health, costly to your relationships, your job, your quality of life, and even life. So we do know that people with chronic pain, there are high prevalence as well in association with things like suicide ideation and suicide. So thank you for bringing that up. And the public health crisis, we like to say that we have this opioid crisis, and that's not what this talk is about, and getting into that, and that's not my expertise. And we have lots of issues around opioids. At the same time, opioids can help people function and live well. And so what I really want to try to get across is, yes, we have to deal with and we have to address all of the issues and the crises, and we have to look at the opioid crisis as a pain crisis, as a public health crisis. And opioids and things are a symptom of something larger and systemic. Does that make sense? I see some people nodding. And okay. And we know that pain is one of the most popular reasons people seek medical care. And in particular, chronic back pain seems to be quite high as well. And yoga, this is why I'm here today, is to explain to you all and give you some of the evidence that's out there as to how yoga might help this huge global systemic problem, might be part of the solution. So it's not replacing medicine, it's not replacing any kind of healthcare or procedures or interventions, but it's an adjunct. So what is yoga? So this is always tough for me, and as I increase my own knowledge and experience of yoga, this always changes for me. So I started yoga in 1990 approximately, and so that's, oh gosh, it's like 30 years, isn't it now? And each year, especially each 5-year kind of chunk, the more and more I learn, the harder and harder this is to describe. So I just want to be really honest. Yoga is something that's really hard to be defined. And sometimes we say in yoga, it can only be experienced. But basically, here's the gist of it. It is a comprehensive system of health. So it is a wisdom tradition. We say approximately 5,000 years old. And it is a tradition that includes both philosophy and practices. So it's not just the practices. It's definitely not just the Instagram classical postures, which that's part of it. I will talk about that. But it is a philosophy and a set of practices. And really the intent of yoga is to uncover the root causes of suffering and then prevent future suffering or alleviating the suffering. The word yoga means to yoke, unite, body, mind, breath, spirit. So we try to bring everything in union, the physical, mental, emotional, social, environmental, so all of our relationships with others, with the environment, and then spiritual. And we're going to talk more about spirituality later on, but looking at the spiritual aspect of the human being. Not everybody maybe considers themselves spiritual, but for those that do, we look at it maybe as things like having purpose or meaning, and for some, they do feel a connection to maybe a higher power. Of course, not everybody has that belief, but yoga we can integrate any faith or any denomination, but really the spirituality part is looking at connection to your true self, again, meaning and purpose, or whatever it might mean to you. And then we have some yoga texts, so there's a whole bunch of different yoga texts that we can look at, and they describe and explain yoga. But here's just, I pulled, a few to get the gist of what some of these texts say. So some say yoga is skill in action, cessation of a fluctuating mind, equanimity or that evenness of mind regardless of what's going on around you, self-realization or self-actualization, sometimes we call it. And really, it's this inward journey of self-discovery. So yoga, again, the philosophy it's rooted in compassion, but it's really surrounding this idea that it's exploration, it's to be curious, self-introspection, and again, to try to gain deeper insight and wisdom into the root causes of our suffering. And then that's how we can then move forward to help prevent future suffering. So I don't know, like I said, everybody has they come here with different knowledge base of yoga, but, this is truly, the roots of yoga and where it comes from. And there are many, many different paths. So remember how I said, there's that final sort of intent is that self-actualization or realization to help prevent future suffering. There are many ways to do that. There are many paths. So there's so many different yoga lineages. We say now, if some of you have heard, we're in this post-lineage time where, there's sort of spin-offs and people creating different styles of yoga, different types. It's almost like the wild, wild west right now with all kinds of different things happening. But when we look at sort of the history, we know that or what yoga tells us is that there's no one correct path to finding those root causes of suffering and alleviating. It might be through study. It might be through service. It might be through devotion, like a devotional practice. Maybe it includes chanting or rituals. Or maybe it is this, and this is what we talk about here, these 8 limbs. And it's, for those of you that are familiar with Patanjali's and Yoga Sutras, the 8 limbs are described in there. And that is kind of the premise that we mostly are familiar with and use in yoga therapy and use in pain care. So these are the 8 limbs. There's no exams, so you don't have to memorize these or anything, and you can Google and find these everywhere. But this is the 8-limbed path of yoga. So I'm just going to briefly, go through these just to give you some reference as to where a starting point in pain care. So we look at the philosophy, the yamas, niyamas. So those are things like how one person might act in the world, or your relationship to others, how you show up every day. And some of these things are, like I said, rooted in like compassion and kindness, and things like not stealing, not hoarding, not having attachment or clinging. Because a lot of these things, what the yogis say in the other ancient wisdom traditions, is say that these kinds of things can cause suffering. So I'm not going to go through them all, but there's, a host of different ethical principles, if you will. And then we have asana, which are that's the physical practice of yoga, or the movements. The full expression of asana is stiram sukham asana, which is steadiness with ease. So it's a mindful movement, but it's also a movement with ease. And then we have pranayama, which are the breathing techniques. That's a very loose translation. Again, I could go a little bit deeper into prana and energy and what that means, and pranayama is using that energy. But for the purposes of today and really bringing in the evidence, we translate pranayama with these breathing techniques because we have evidence that can help people in pain. And then we have the pratyahara, and we look at this as withdrawing the 5 senses or the senses and going within and looking more at interoceptive awareness. So interoceptive awareness is really being in tune with your own physiological state, and there are many practices we can do to cultivate that, and we have quite a bit of really cool research actually that's showing us the value of interoceptive awareness practices for people in pain. And then the last 3, I'm going to kind of clump together because it's really hard to talk about these 3, but dharana, dhyana, samadhi, think of this like a continuum. So think of concentration and focus where you're really practicing to be very attentive on a single focal point, and then you go into maybe some sort of a meditative state. And meditation, again, we could spend a whole week just even saying what is meditation, and there's different views. But looking at meditation as a state that opens up to more clarity and not, the mind chatter. So there's a sense of clarity and a sense of deeper wisdom. That would be what I will offer you right now. And then going into then a sense of real bliss or connection or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's just peace. Now, to make this applicable, if some of you, if I'm starting to talk in a way that feels uncomfortable and kind of woo-woo, you look at these last 3. Think of if you play an instrument or if you play a sport. Let's just pick, let's say you're learning to play piano, and it's a lot of focus and attention, and you have to learn, and you have to you can't be distracted if it's brand new. And then you play in more and more, or the sport. So you're learning, I used to figure skate, so figure skating, so you get on the ice, you have to really focus and pay attention. And then as you practice with that focus, with that intention, next what comes is almost like it's an effortless, easeful state. And then into this sort of samadhi, or this peace, almost bliss. Some of you may have heard of the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the flow state. So think of an athlete or playing the piano, all of a sudden it's like you're at one with the ice, or at one with the basketball, or at one with the instrument. Have you heard things like that? Or maybe many of you have had that experience. So that just gives kind of a practical example of these states. So, all right. And this basically says everything that I just said, but in a different way, and it just gives you, it breaks it up into practices and philosophy. So the practices, which I just talked about, so you've got the movement, awareness, breathing, focus, attention, meditation. That's all part of this 8-limbed path. And then the philosophy, without getting into the details, this really gives a nice idea and overview of what yoga is rooted in this self-reflection and curiosity, exploration, humility, compassion, and a sense of worthiness and wholeness, connection and peace. And for some of you here, if you work with people in pain, or if you yourself are in pain, or you have a family or a loved one in pain, maybe you start to see how some of this might be applicable. So yoga therapy, this is the definition. The International Association of Yoga Therapists has this definition from 2007. And the International Association of Yoga Therapists was founded in 1989, so it's a relatively newer profession. It's really trying to, be established in the healthcare realm. So the definition is the process of empowering individuals to progress towards improved health and well-being through the application of the teachings and practices of yoga. So I've highlighted the important parts here. So it's a process. So yoga therapy, it's not a prescription. So it's a little different than our current biomedical system, right? So this is something that is more of something that we really work with another person to figure things out. So it's different. It's a process of empowering. So again, it's not that we're doing something to someone, and that has its place, and we need that, but yoga therapy isn't that. So yoga therapy is empowering the individual. So we're like facilitators of their recovery. And we're empowering them to progress towards improved health and well-being. So if you've heard the term salutogenesis, the creation of health, so this whole philosophy is based on moving more towards what's right, what's working well, what can we do to create more health, and not looking at the pathologies. So that has its place, but that's why I love so much what I do with the bridging, is bridging, the biomedical system and the pathologies and the fixing, and this approach of, and let's also work towards creating health. Do you understand how those can work together and it's not an either-or situation? Okay. And then, of course, as I've said, it's the teachings and the practices. So it's not just prescribing this pose for this condition. So we're looking at all these different practices and the philosophy behind that's informing how we work. Okay, so I just wanted to chat a little bit more about yoga therapy, just so that you know, what is this? Is it just some term that one person came up with? And so, like I said, it is a profession. It's not regulated, but it is a profession that was, the organization of the International Association of Yoga Therapists was founded in 1989, like I said. So they do have a scope of practice. They have standards for training and accreditation and credentialing of therapists. So as of now, the yoga therapy program is it's at least 1,000 hours. And there is a PubMed indexed research journal, and that's the International Journal of Yoga Therapy. And yoga therapy includes an assessment and a plan of care. So it's a little bit different than our modern postural yoga. So this is your one-on-one with a therapist that has some extra training and has a little bit more knowledge of different conditions. And you can have yoga therapy as one-on-one, or also you can have small therapeutic groups. And so just to give you an idea of where we might see yoga therapists, this was a survey done in 2015. So it's with the Maryland University of Integrative Health and the International Association of Yoga Therapists. So it was a collaborative study. And I don't know, it's probably too small for you to see, but I'll just read out some of this. So what they found was that yoga therapists were working in hospitals, about 35%, and this was in the US, I don't know if I mentioned that. Hospitals associated with university educational programs, about 16%, and then it goes on to military hospitals, outpatient clinics, community-based clinics, veteran affairs clinics, physicians' practices at 11%. And then the other category, so almost half is the other category, and that is things like the integrative wellness centers, pain management centers, eating disorder clinics, HIV clinics. This was another part of that same survey. Now asking people which department, asking the yoga therapists which department they work in. And again, you can see there's cardiology, there's yoga therapists in maternal, neonatal care, oncology at 17%. And actually, we have quite a growing large body of research in yoga in oncology, in cancer care, and some people doing great work in the area there. Orthopedics, pediatrics, psychiatry, behavioral health at 26%, so quite a few there. And then physical therapy, which that's my background, so I was kind of excited to see that, about 22% of yoga therapists found in that setting, and general rehab, surgery. And then the other department here included things like neurology, rheumatology, internal medicine, primary care, women's health, and of course pain clinics. Okay, so that was I wanted to give you kind of a brief overview. There's your yoga in, what did that take, 15 minutes? It's, I hope you can appreciate the vastness of that, but that was what I thought maybe would be the best for us today to highlight, and we'll come back to how it then fits in with the evidence with pain care. So before we take that journey as to how yoga might help people in pain, more specifically, how about we talk about pain first? Does that sound good? Good, because you don't have a choice, because that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so pain is. Way you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Pain is fill in the blank. One word, just anything. There's no right or wrong. Just get a sense of what is it for you. Pain is? Limiting. Unpleasant. Debilitating. Sorry? Mind-boggling. Pain is a sensory experience. Pain is exhausting. Pain is depressing. Pain is a teacher. Pain is persistent. Pain is isolating. Two more. Pain is a barrier. Pain is a personal perception. Beautiful. These are words that people have given, just like you. Many of what you've said are on here. Does anything pop out at you as surprising or thinking, oh, I never would have thought of that? Or sorry? Pleasurable. Pain is pleasurable for some. Pain, so thank you for saying that, Anne-Marie. So shout out to some of you, I know, many of you know, my beautiful friend, colleague, teacher, Neil Pearson. That's from him. Pain is a lot like love. So you can have him express what that means to me. You know, it's complex and and it's an experience. Anything else that pops out that you find interesting or resonate with? Or any gut reactions. So it's just something to look at. And, everyone is going to feel differently. And sometimes people have reactions, like pain is my friend. If you're someone who, lives with persistent pain, and, that might really not sit well with you. But these are just things that people, have said. So interesting? Yeah. But the gist of it is, I think it was you that said it's a personal perception, or, and it is a personal experience. So here's the International Association for the Study of Pain, and this is our current definition, but it is under revision. It's been around for quite some time, and they're working on trying to make it a little bit different and updating it. But pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage, or described in terms of such damage. So again, the operative words here, it's sensory and emotional. So you can't separate the two. You may be able to disconnect from emotions. You may be able to regulate emotions, but you stub your toe, you have a paper cut. There's always an emotion there. So one thing in pain care, when we're learning about pain, we do, or I invite you all to start to think about how we get caught up in that dualistic mind-body. Even saying something like the mind-body connection is kind of odd, because that tends to suggest that it's separate and they're talking to each other. So the way of thinking, it's all one, and we have different aspects, and yes, there's different drivers, and we treat different aspects, and it really is helpful to try to explain things, like how can we teach this? How can we do anything without the separation? So we need that, but I'm just inviting you to think in a different way too, and thinking that you can't just have a sensory experience. The emotions, your whole being is always connected. So you can think about that. And then again, actual or potential tissue damage. So that's important. So regardless of what we're talking about here, whether it's acute pain or more persistent pain, the message is it's a warning. So it's trying to protect us. So if you just do this for a moment, like you bend your finger back. Of course, if it's contraindicated, don't do that, or pick another body part or another finger. But if you just gently, just go gentle, and then if you feel comfortable and you go a little more, until the point where you're like, yeah, that hurts, there's no tissue damage being done. So pain, a healthy pain system, will always warn us. Its purpose is to try to protect. So what happens, and I'm not going to go through, I decided in this lecture, there's just so much to talk about, I'm not going to go through detailed pain neurophysiology, and you can find all kinds of amazing free lectures online. So if you're interested, I'll give you those resources and you can watch them. But what I do want to say is that we do start with a signal, and it's a danger signal, some sort of noxious stimulus. So there's no such thing as a pain signal or a pain receptor. So this is what the contemporary pain science is telling us now. Can you wrap your head around that? So pain is an output. Pain is an experience. Pain is not an input. The noxious stimulus and then the danger detection signals, those are, inputs. But what happens is that the brain has to receive a whole bunch of messages about everything that's happening in the body. So absolutely, from the structure, from the tissue. Again, take stubbing a toe or a paper cut, straining your hamstrings, or whatever. It's going to definitely take that into consideration and take those messages. But there's all these other things too. The brain has to take into consideration the state of our immune system, our hormonal system, the current state that our nervous system is in, our thoughts, our emotions, our past experiences and memories, and then even our thoughts and or our beliefs and our expectations about the situation and other sensory input. So what I'm saying here is context matters. And then all of those inputs are then, there's a lot of processing happening at the spinal cord in the brain, and then the brain has to make some sort of a sensible story out of all of these inputs. And then the output is the pain experience. And so maybe you're starting to think a little bit, wow, that's interesting. And maybe you can start to see how some of these different yoga techniques might be able to influence pain if we know that so many different factors contribute to the pain experience. Now, one thing that's really important here, I think I'll just pause for a moment. I really want to make sure everybody leaves here understanding that pain is not all in your head. Pain is not something that you can just think away, because sometimes these messages seem to portray that, seem to say that, you know, it's just this output and you have control and you should be able just to change that. And it's, of course, that's not that easy. So pain is real. It's not all in your head. And it is an output. It's not an input. Okay? And again, you can learn. There's so many lectures, free lectures out there that I can send you if you want to learn more. So the purpose of pain is protection. So this might challenge your belief a little bit. So sit with this. So take a breath and sit with this idea that pain, the purpose of pain is not to tell us what the problem is, where it is, or how bad it is. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to protect. So it doesn't tell us exactly what the problem is, where it is, or how bad it is. It can definitely, we can use the pain story to help inform us as the healthcare provider, but that's not the purpose, okay? We have a lot of outputs that protect us, however. So an unpleasant sensation or the pain experience, that's one. But we also have the body also has these other outputs. So that could be muscle spasms or weakness. If anyone here has debilitating low back pain and you have those episodes where you try to get out of bed and your legs just fall, right? You don't have anything there to support you. So that's a protection output. Your body's trying to protect you. Protective postures, so we know we have a lot of evidence that shows people that have pain for a prolonged period of time particularly tend to move in different ways and more of these sort of fear-based kind of, because they want to protect, because we're hurting. Fear, anger can be protective responses. Anxiety, the nervous system can be on high alert, and the breathing can even change. So another thing that I'd like you to consider is that pain is normal. In our culture, we tend to equate pain with bad and pleasure with good, or pain as a punishment, pleasure as a reward. And some of the wisdom traditions kind of, they give us some teachings that say, pain is inevitable and it's a part of life and it's normal. And it protects us, as I've said, and we need it. And I think we can all agree that, yeah, pain has a purpose. However, many of you in this room probably would agree that, well, sometimes it protects us even when we don't need protecting. And that is this idea of somewhere that danger detection system has somewhere, gone awry, where it's hypervigilant, it's on high alert, and the whole system wants to protect us, even though we may not need that protecting. And so chronic or persistent pain, the IASP, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, or the International Association for the Study of Pain, they define chronic or persistent pain as lasting longer than 3 months. And there's some other literature from other associations. I believe it's the American Psychological Association, say it's 6 months. So basically 3 to 6 months, or beyond the normal or expected tissue healing time. So based on the type of injury or insult or lesion, what would be the normal expected tissue healing time? And if pain persists beyond that, then we would call it persistent pain. There's new classifications. You can find this online. The IASP has some definitions of chronic chronic primary pain and chronic secondary pain. Chronic primary pain is, think of it as pain in and of itself as a diagnosis, and think of chronic secondary pain would be pain that's associated with a pain condition, like maybe osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis or neurological conditions like MS and so forth. Or cancer, that would be another case. So here's what the IASP has defined recently as chronic primary pain. So I'll just read this out in case you can't read it. You probably can, but I'll read it anyway. So chronic primary pain is defined as pain in one or more anatomical regions that persists or recurs for longer than 3 months and is associated with significant emotional distress or functional disability. And that's interference with activities of daily life and participation in social roles. And that cannot be better accounted for by another chronic pain condition. Okay, so let's take a moment to look at some of the changes that happen in us when pain does persist. So physically, the tissues can actually change, right? They can get weak. They may have less tissue tolerance. How we move, I've mentioned that already, can change. We do have evidence, like I said, that movement is more guarded. We have less of those refined movements. This is where I usually do my breakdancing. Tough crowd. Breath can change. So if you just think, maybe even of yourself or people you work with, my shoulder hurts every time I get to there. We start to not even realize that we have this habit of moving differently, right? Or our breath. So we might kind of make a face, or we hold our breath, maybe we don't even realize it. And remember what I talked about, those outputs can then become another input into the system. So you are starting to see here, if we could maybe change some of those inputs, that might change that cycle a little bit. Awareness can change. We've got actually quite a bit of evidence that shows our body awareness actually changes when pain persists. Fatigue, so our energy can change. Sleep, we know there's a bi-directional relationship between sleep and pain. There was an awesome talk here at the pain conference that I was at recently on sleep and pain. So pain can contribute to worse sleep or poor sleep quality, and then poor sleep quality can contribute to more pain. And then our physiology can change, and our nervous systems, like I said, could be on more that high alert. Emotionally, so we know that there's a high association of anxiety and depression with pain, fear of doing those movements, obviously that cause pain, or those activities. We do see even anger and things like shame. I'm really, right now, part of my work is in compassion in pain care, and there's some fascinating research out now that shows people in pain seem to have a lack of self-compassion, and training self-compassion has some really promising outcomes with not just pain, but also functional outcomes as well. So is that interesting to you? Yeah, I love that part of it. It's fascinating. And then, of course, poor stress management and overwhelm. And again, these aren't things to put blame on the person in pain. Like another thing you're not doing well, you're not managing your pain, or managing rather your stress good enough. You have to remember that the systems actually change when pain persists to make it really challenging, and you're in a state of overwhelm, or even cognitively and behaviorally. Did you know the brain changes as pain persists? That may influence our higher executive functioning, our ability to critically think and learn, our memory. And here we are, healthcare professionals, trying so hard to help people. We're giving them all this education and these things to do at home. But if the system is at a disadvantage, that's challenging. So hopefully, I'm bringing this to you too, so maybe you haven't thought of some of these things, which helps maybe all of us have a little bit or a lot more compassion when we find people in pain maybe not following through with the things that we hope that they would do, right? It's not that people are just being lazy or they just can't. Like, there are real reasons and real challenges. Altered thought patterns catastrophization and rumination. And why would you think that your brain would go into catastrophizing and ruminating? It's not like you're choosing it. Why would that happen? The protection piece, right? If the system is hypervigilant on high alert, then that would serve you to catastrophize, because that's going to make you survive, right? Does that make sense? And then, of course, there's things like self-blame, and again, that poor stress management and coping. Socially, and this is where yoga can really help in too with the group setting, which I'll talk about, but we do have research that shows certain populations of people who have persistent pain do have an increased perceived social isolation or increased sense of loneliness. And I mean, that makes sense when you look at, maybe you've lost your job or you're not doing the activities that you love. You maybe can't even go to a movie because it hurts to sit too long. So your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so you're less connected to other people. And you can see how that just contributes to maybe more depression or anxiety, and even a feeling of worthlessness. So many patients that I've worked with over the last 22 years, when I really get to hear them and know their story, not only is there this sense of a lack of self-compassion, but there's this sense of there's just no purpose, or they just feel worthless. And spiritually, this is where we might bring in that component, which is closely related to social in many ways, but it's going a little bit deeper because you just feel less connected even just to yourself. And that sense of peace, you just don't feel, a lot of people will say, I'm not me, I've lost myself. And then sometimes I've even heard stories where people have said that their God or their higher power has abandoned them, or that their pain is a punishment. So we have to understand that, particularly as healthcare professionals, and we're trying to take this whole person-centered and valued approach. If people have these beliefs, this is really important, and it will impact our care. So here's another definition of pain, and this was in the Pain Journal, 2016, and it was a proposed updated definition of the pain. It's not accepted by IASP, but Williams and Craig did a good job. I wanted to share it. It just goes beyond what's out there. So a distressing experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage with sensory, emotional, cognitive, and social components. Okay, so 5 things to know about pain. Are you ready? These were out of all this, these were the highlights. So I thought this is what I would love for you to walk out of this room really knowing. So pain is not an accurate indication of the state of the tissues. And don't throw anything at me. I'm not saying this. This is the current pain science, okay? This is what that is telling us. Pain is complex. You have the capacity to change your pain. So again, this is a message of hope. This isn't a message of blame. So if any of you or if any of your loved ones, if you come home and you want to say, hey, I learned all this stuff, this isn't saying you have the capacity to change your pain, so therefore if you haven't, you failed. That's not what this message is about. This is a message of hope saying, look, there are things that we can do. Isn't that exciting? And this is what the science is telling us. And you can use any aspect of your existence to change the pain. This is where the yoga comes in, which I'm going to talk about next for a few moments. You can use any aspect of your existence to change pain. Isn't that a neat statement? It could be through movement. It could be through breath. It could be through cognitively, maybe reading, studying, education, maybe social connection, a good hug, oxytocin, social connection, laughing, maybe some endorphins are released. David Butler, a leading pain researcher, says, open up the medicine cabinet in our brains. So we have endogenous morphine. We make endorphins, and it's called top-down modulation of pain. So we can use that. And it doesn't have to be necessarily through movement or exercise, if that's not your thing. So you can use any aspect of your existence to change pain. creating a sense of safety is key. So, like I said, I didn't get into the pain neurophysiology, but hopefully I gave you a sense of how important safety is. Because if the system thinks there's a threat, then the output's going to be protection. But if we can have some sense of safety, and this isn't just us consciously thinking we're safe, which is part of it, but it's also the implicit messages maybe that's going on within the system as well. And there's lots of different ways we can cultivate safety. So yoga is an option. So you already saw this slide. When pain persists, these are some of the changes that happen in all aspects of our existence. You all on board with that? I did some intentional repetition here. So here's yoga for people with persistent or chronic pain, and maybe some of the ways that it can help all aspects of our existence. So physically, so through the actual tissues, the physical postures, the movement, the breath work. So through some of the yoga movements or some of the yoga postures and the movement, perhaps we can increase the tissue tolerance, the strength. But also through breath, through awareness practices. We do have some cool research showing that different awareness practices can change pain. We have research showing yoga can help with sleep and can change our physiology. So I feel like now I want another hour now with you so we can go through all the research in detail. But things like we have some evidence showing that yoga can help reduce inflammatory markers. So that's really interesting. And then also brain function, which I'll get to in a second. Emotionally, we have research, so yoga can help with improved mood, anxiety, and depression, and increased confidence. And of course, the self-compassion I talked about. Cognitively, behaviorally, we have evidence showing yoga can help improve brain function. So there's some cool studies, increase gray matter, particularly in the insular cortex, and that might have something to do with modulating the pain experience, as well as there's a host of other areas in the brain as well that might be helpful for emotional regulation and autonomic nervous system regulation, which can help with pain. And then just moving on here to the social piece, which I've talked about in a group setting, so that might be helpful as well. And then, of course, the spiritual. And the spiritual part, it's hard in this setting to really give you a sense, well, how does yoga help again with that? But you just have to trust that, that the philosophy and the framework that yoga is based on is set in these principles of wholeness and worthiness, and we just sort of take it from there as yoga therapists. So this is saying exactly what that chart said, again in another way, just in case your brains, everybody works differently in different ways and learns differently. So these are the practices of yoga that research has shown that can be beneficial for people in pain. So the movement, awareness, breathing, those focusing your attention, concentrating, and meditative practices. And then the philosophy, and I've said much of that already. So what does the research actually say? Well, so this is the part where my disclosure at the beginning. Remember I said I had one product in here where I do receive some royalties. So I co-edited and co-authored a textbook. And so this chapter by Stephanie Munez, she's a researcher in the States. She does a lot of her research out of Johns Hopkins University. And she wrote an entire chapter that critically reviews the research on yoga and pain. So I will refer you to that if you're interested in the research part. But I thought I should do this for you all just because I thought you might be interested. So what we do have, these are systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So for those of you that care about research or know about it, that's our gold standard. That's level 1A evidence. So you're looking at taking all the randomized control trials. And we have some, it's promising, for chronic low back pain. So these are all the systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So for chronic low back pain, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, and fibromyalgia, and chronic neck pain. This is a lot of words on the slide. And how much time do I have now? How am I doing? I think we're doing good. You guys happy? Yeah, oh good. We got tons of time. I'm almost done. We're good? Okay. So I am going to just take a breath and slow down because I have more time than I thought. So this is one of the systematic reviews, so you can see clinically significant improvement. That's pretty good language for a systematic review. In functional outcomes in mild to moderate low back pain and fibromyalgia, significantly improved pain in OA, RA, and mild severe low back pain, significantly improved psychological outcomes in mild to moderate low back pain and OA. So the evidence suggests that yoga is an acceptable and safe intervention which may result in clinically relevant improvements in pain, functional outcomes associated with a wide range of musculoskeletal conditions. So I think this is, again, another operative word, is the, well, I don't need to highlight it, I can just say acceptable and safe. So we don't really know necessarily that yoga can significantly reduce pain, but we know that it can be an acceptable and safe intervention and not increase pain. And that's important when we want to introduce anything into a healthcare system. We have to show that the risk is low, the relative risk is low. Another one, there's evidence yoga may be useful for several pain-associated disorders, even short-term practice for low back pain, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, and neck pain. And then finally, another systematic review meta-analysis, there's strong evidence for short-term effectiveness and moderate evidence for long-term effectiveness of yoga for chronic low back pain. And for those of you familiar with the research, we don't really have much out there of this level 1A evidence of systematic reviews that says any intervention out there is effective, even just moderately for long-term. So that's pretty interesting. So we do have limitations. We need way more robust studies. We're really just, starting here, even though some of these studies have been around for a couple decades. But we have limited evidence for which practices are most effective. Like, we don't know which practices, who, in what context. If we need specialized yoga therapists doing this, how much training do you like that? Just we haven't even started that kind of research. Neither do we know anything about dose or dosage. So we have a lot to do before we can really start accepting these into clinical best practice guidelines. Certainly don't know the underlying mechanisms. So out of all that, the take-home message is the evidence does show that there are improvements in pain, in disability, in mood, and quality of life, and that it appears safe. So that's good news. And then finally, what I just wanted to share with you was something that I was invited to be involved in. And I have to get out my notes because there's a whole bunch of acronyms here that I can never remember. But my intention for sharing this with you is just to show you that yoga therapy does and can have a place in our current healthcare system. And sometimes it's really hard to show that. So here's one example. So in the US, in 2017, they had the very first meeting of the Integrative Pain Care Policy Congress. So it was hosted by the Academy of Integrative Pain Management, Integrative Health Policy Consortium, and Pains Project. And what they had like representatives of over 75 different organizations. So they had people like researchers, they had healthcare professionals, people in pain were at the table, federal agencies, policymakers, all the stakeholders. And what they did was they had this, they made this definition of what is evidence-based comprehensive pain management. What do we need to do for this pain crisis? And then I had the privilege to be invited, because we had one representative from the International Association of Yoga Therapists to be present at the table here. And so I had the privilege of co-authoring a white paper on how yoga therapy can be part of this definition of this comprehensive integrative pain management program. It is in the U.S. Canada, we have the Canadian Pain Coalition, and we have the Canadian Pain Task Force just came out with a report in June. I wasn't involved in that, but I'm hoping maybe the next one, I think that comes out every 4 or 5 years, maybe we can start to say, hey, yoga can be a part, we're here too, and we have some evidence now. So I hope you're finding this part of it interesting. This is an important part of why I'm here doing this med talk. But here is the definition of the comprehensive integrative pain management. So it includes biomedical care. That's your medicine, biology. It includes psychosocial health. It includes complementary health practices, not alternative, right? Complementary, adjunctive practices, and spiritual care. It's person-centered and focuses on maximizing function and wellness. The care plans are developed through a shared decision-making model that reflects the available evidence. So remember, this is evidence-informed. That's very important, regarding optimal clinical practice and the person's goals and values. So then remember this I put up, seems like yesterday. Remember that definition of yoga therapy? So now we have them side by side. So there's your comprehensive integrative pain management, and I've highlighted in orange all of the words that overlap with yoga therapy. Is that cool? Happy? Yay, good. So again, my bias is here. Yes, I'm biased towards yoga, and I was clear about that at the beginning, but it is pretty cool that it fits in. And I'm not going to go through that all. You can rewatch the replay if you want to go through. So yoga therapy, filling in the gaps. No more gaps, no more gaps in pain care. Everything I've said about, everything I've already said, plus yoga can be an accessible option. We are really lacking in accessible options for people. So it can be adaptable to different physical and mental abilities. It can be available to people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged. We've got a lot of great programs out there in yoga in inner city schools, prisons, halfway houses, addiction recovery centers, like some really cool stuff going on. Long-term, yoga can be a long-term and self-management part of the solution. We are lacking in solutions that are long-term. People are discharged from formal care, and just think about it, and many of you here probably are living with persistent pain. You're not a patient. You're living, you're out there in the world, and there's not really a lot of long-term kind of options, and options that promote self-efficacy and self-management. And again, we've already said that it can be safe. That's been shown. Now, I will say, I will insert this here, is we don't know what types, what kinds, and we can talk about this in the Q&A, because this is a common question I get is, okay, where do I go? What do I do? So I was born and raised in Saskatchewan. I have a ton of friends here. I have a ton of friends who own yoga studios, and I love them all. And what we need to see as healthcare providers is when we are saying, yeah, go to yoga, we do have to understand that not all classes are appropriate for people with chronic pain. So part of my work and job, and part of why I'm here, is I'm trying to help increase awareness of what a chronic pain or a persistent pain-informed yoga practice looks like, the guidelines, what it needs, because some people, a regular yoga class in the community might do more harm than good. So we can talk about that later. Social, I've already talked about that. And I just want to say one thing here. I'm okay. I know I'm going over, but I'm so happy. You guys look good, too. I'm reading you. You look like you're okay. So honestly, I have like three more slides. But I've already talked about the social part, but let me just say this. Think about this for a moment. You're living with persistent pain for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And first of all, there's not really a lot of options like I talked about in the community. And if there is, maybe it's like, oh, here's another like chronic pain. Here's something for me to go to. I have chronic pain, and this is another chronic pain class, or you know what I'm saying? It's like maybe even, and I don't know, but this is just what I've been told by people with pain, is that it would be nice to have some sense of normalcy. So wouldn't it be cool to have a yoga class in the community, a therapeutic yoga class that's chronic pain informed, follows the guidelines, and it's open to everybody. And you don't even have to call it necessarily, yoga for pain. It's a gentle, it's an adaptive, accessible class, and then you get to everybody just mixes all together. And the benefits of a type of a class like that it's for everybody. I mean, I would love to, be a part of a class that integrates. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the spirituality part. So again, yoga is a psycho-spiritual practice, and it's unique. I don't know really of much else out there that can offer this opportunity to address spiritual care, to spiritual health, and at the same time offer the physical, like the movement practices, the mental health practices, and the social connection. So it's quite unique, I think, in that way. And by the way, spiritual health, I may have said this, but we do have research that shows spiritual health is important to people with pain, that they would like that integrated into their care. So again, I just like to say that so that us yogis aren't standing up here saying everybody needs and wants spiritual care. This is in response to people saying their spirituality is important, and they use different spiritual health. They use different aspects of their spiritual health to help cope with their pain. And then this final last one is practitioner self-care. So a yoga therapy approach can influence our quality of care because compassion does emerge from that, and it can help to prevent burnout. We have some preliminary research on that, which is kind of interesting. So yoga therapy as a sustainable approach for the clinician. So if we do have clinicians in here or healthcare providers, I'm really not trying to sell you all to become a yoga therapist. That's not my intent. My intent is just if you're here, you might be a healthcare provider that's kind of interested in this approach. So I'm here to say we do have evidence that shows that it can help to prevent burnout, different aspects of it. That's a pretty large global sweeping claim, I just realized, but different aspects may help us foster resiliency. And that empowering philosophy is one of it because we're not fixing, right? It's not the fix-it approach. It's more empower. We're the facilitator of recovery, helping people progress. And then the non-attachment philosophy of yoga. So Joan Halifax, who's she is an anthropologist and an ecologist, and she has this term, therapeutic humility, which isn't that a beautiful term? So we do the best we can as healthcare providers, everything we can. And then you detach from the outcome. We have no control. And that is, as a lot of the ancient wisdom traditions say, that is one of the root causes of suffering, right, is clinging and attaching to outcome. So you do your best and you let go. And that can potentially really help us, with this burnout problem that many of us do suffer from. And then, like I said, the yoga philosophy is just rooted in compassion, and that includes self-compassion. Okay, I think I'm done. So this is the last content information slide. So this kind of summarizes that the whole framework of yoga therapy in pain care. So it's a philosophical and ethical framework. So can you understand that? It provides a framework, which is hard for you to understand what that is right now, but that's part of it. And then it also provides these individual practices and techniques, which, if you were a clinician on Monday, you can integrate these techniques. You may not have the framework behind it, but you can pick and choose cool different breath practices or movements or a mindfulness practice. Does that make sense? And then you as a person in pain, on tonight, maybe at the refreshments, we can go through a little awareness practice and you can try it on your own. And so yoga therapy is for the healthcare provider to share with people in pain, and for the people in pain to practice on your own or in a group setting, and for the healthcare provider to also practice your own personal practice. Okay, so that's it. You don't have to look at this. This is for the replay. You can pause it and look at the references. And there's another one. A lot of these are the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses, if you're interested. And Dr. Tim McCall, he's a medical doctor in the U.S. If you're interested in looking at his site, drmccall.com. Every few years, he compiles a literature review. So he did one just last year, 2019, 117 health conditions helped by yoga. a bibliography of research. And he's got about 50 pages of studies cited, different levels of evidence, but it's might be helpful. And then those are the resources, and that's all that I have. My website's on there, so you can contact me with questions. I really thank you. This was over an hour, so thank you for being so patient and attentive. And I would love to answer questions. I'll take a few, and then we'll move on to the refreshments and talk even more. So thank you. So anybody have any questions? Yes. And you have to push your, so that the people
push it and then
who are live streaming can hear.
Do you know of an online yoga that might address for chronic pain beginners?
So I do. So I have a lot of that's what I do. So that was my disclosure slide at the beginning.
Okay.
So I've got the Overcome Pain with Gentle Yoga with Neil Pearson. They're online, and so Overcome Pain with Gentle Yoga. And they are specifically, there's 7 different practices, and they're specifically geared towards people with pain. And there's movements and breathing, visualization. And then the other thing is, if you want to, just trying to think, there's so many resources. That would probably be the best place to start. And then if you want to contact me, so on my website or other places, please contact me, and then I can help you even further. I love doing that. So, but start with those videos. They're really good. They're downloadable on Vimeo.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you please elaborate on pain-informed yoga practices? Like specifically, do you mean individualizing because of the individual nature from the cause as well as the perception of pain? So how would practices be
chronic pain informed?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question. So, so you could do individual or group. So the individual, what I was talking about when I said chronic pain-informed classes, I was talking about the group classes. So the individualized, that's the essence of yoga therapy. So yoga therapy one-on-one, so they do an intake, you assess the person, so you're individualizing it for that person. But the chronic pain-informed class, there are different guidelines, principles, so that's a really good question, but one thing that's really important is that the instructor, so the yoga instructor, has some education around pain. So we want to increase pain literacy in the yoga professional. So that's number one, right? So you have to have like that knowledge because you can inadvertently cause more harm than good. And there's a lot of different guidelines. So for example, how do we move in the face of pain? So if you're a yoga professional and people have pain in your class, whether it's acute pain or persistent pain, but just talking in the context of persistent pain, how do you instruct that? What do you say? So there are guidelines, which is beyond the scope of what we're doing here today, but there are movement guidelines, a recovery of movement guidelines that you can do, which is part of, it's that Pain Care U program that Neil Pearson has started. And so that's, if you're interested, I can chat with you later and give you, that program. And then a lot of it, I'll just say another thing. So education of the yoga professional about pain, which there's a lot of that out there. That's accessible for the yoga professional. Integrating that into yoga teacher training programs, hopefully. And then the other part of it is the actual formal training. But the other part of it is language. So I do want to give you just something really quick. So for example, if you're a yoga professional, or actually it doesn't matter, any professional that works with people in pain, and you're saying to bend forward, and you say bend forward, and bend your knees to protect your spine. To protect your spine, that's potentially nocibic language. to say